We start this hour in the Middle East with tensions running high as US President Donald Trump announced that a ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas may be very close. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump said a possible agreement could be revealed within hours. This is what the US President said.
It's an update to the latest ceasefire agreement that Israel has agreed to, but Hamas is still considering.
Well, they're very close to an agreement on Gaza, and we'll let you know about it during the day or maybe tomorrow, and we have a chance of that. And I think we have a chance of making a deal with Iran also. They don't want to be blown up. They would rather make a deal, and I think that could happen in the not-too-distant future. That would be a great thing if we could have a deal without bombs being dropped all over the Middle East. That would be a very good thing. They can't have a nuclear weapon.
Well, the proposed plan, known as the Witkoff deal, includes a 60-day ceasefire, the release of 28 Israeli hostages dead and alive, and over 1,200 Palestinian prisoners to be released. But Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz warned Hamas to accept the deal or face annihilation. Hamas says it is still reviewing the plan and consulting with other factions in Gaza. Meanwhile, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said Gaza is the hungriest place on earth. They further stated that the enclave's entire 2.3 million people face catastrophic hunger. This comes as the UAE ambassador Mohammed Abu Shabab, speaking for the Arab group, has firmly rejected Israel's proposed aid mechanism. This is what he said.
Urgently, we demand the lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid and its distribution based on humanitarian principles. The Council cannot stand by as starvation is used as a weapon of war. The Arab group categorically rejects Israel's proposed aid mechanism, which violates basic humanitarian principles and international law. At the same time, we reiterate our long-standing demand for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire, and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and the release of detainees.
We now head to Europe. US Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal have met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv as diplomatic efforts intensify ahead of expected peace talks. Graham announced that the US Senate will advance a bill next week to impose tougher sanctions on Russia and countries continuing to buy its oil and other goods. During their visit, both senators accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of stalling the peace process. Graham, who spoke with Donald Trump before the trip, said the US president expects concrete actions from Moscow. This comes as Trump called both Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stubborn while trying to mediate an end to the war. Here is what the senators had to say.
I don't believe Russia is interested in peace. As we speak, they're building up their forces along Ukraine's border for a counteroffensive in the summer or the fall. I'm going to Paris and I'm going to Germany after this trip. I'm going to urge our European allies to lower the price cap, to make it harder on Putin's fossil fuel economy, increase OPEC production, and lower the price cap. If Europe will do that, it will matter. It will hurt Russia's war machine. Ukraine is ready for peace, is willing to make sacrifices and compromise for peace, is willing to stop the fighting to achieve peace. It's clear to almost anyone, Putin is not remotely interested in anything that would lead to peace.
It's on Vladimir Putin. And right now, let's be very blunt, he's playing the United States for a stooge. Americans don't like to be made fools of. But that's what he's doing. Clearly, obviously, prolonging and playing for time, stonewalling and stalling and stringing out the President of the United States. Americans won't stand for it.
Meanwhile, Russia claims to have shot down over 1,400 Ukrainian drones in the past week and taken control of 13 settlements in Sumy, Kharkiv and the Donetsk region. The Russian Defense Ministry also reported strikes on Ukrainian military infrastructure and reportedly repelled multiple attacks while advancing on several fronts. Ukraine, on the other hand, said its forces deployed a newly developed mobile air defense system to shoot down Russian drones over Odessa. Kyiv reported 93 frontline clashes on May the 30th alone, including the repelling of 28 Russian attacks near Pokrovsk. This comes as Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, has said that Moscow is open to a ceasefire, but only if the West stops arming Ukraine and Kyiv halts troop mobilization. He added that a simple truce would not be enough to end the conflict. Well, several developments there. Joining us to discuss them is Gilbert Doctorow, a Russian affairs expert who's joining us from Brussels. Gilbert, as always, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us. Some strong statements there from US senators that are in Ukraine. They say that Russia is stalling. They say that sanctions are coming and that the US have been having the wool pulled over their eyes. What's your response to those comments?
We're watching political theater. The two senators, Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, who are now in Kiev, have been among the most vicious anti-Russian politicians on Capitol Hill. And they are both there expressing the views that they have said in Washington in the last week, that they are imposing on President Trump a bill which sets these new sanctions on Russia as a harsh response to what they have just explained in the tape you gave. Russia supposedly unwilling to come to the peace table. Well, that is political theater, but it does set certain conditions for Mr. Trump, and he is maneuvering very well, very skillfully, dancing his dance, which is to keep all of his opponents off balance, not to appear as if he's siding with the Russians, when de facto he is. I expect that he will make the best of this bad situation. He will accept the sanctions as having been originated in his group when they have not been. They are being imposed on him, and they are veto-proof because more than 80 senators have signed up to them. But what I expect will come out of this is exactly the opposite of what Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal think will come out. It will be that Mr. Trump will gracefully acknowledge that Russia must be punished, and he will punish Russia, at the same time that he is balanced and is punishing Ukraine. The explanation will be that both sides need pressure to moderate their positions and come to terms. As regards Ukraine, he will cut all American aid to Ukraine. And that will sober up people in Kiev, and it will indeed bring the war closer to an end. That is what I see resulting from this political theater that you have just put on the stage.
Gilbert, some US officials, top senators, we've also had European leaders as well, saying that Putin is dragging his feet and prolonging these peace negotiations to strengthen his position on the battlefield. Does Putin actually want peace?
The appearance that we get from the news, or both alternative news and mainstream news in the West and the world at large, is that Mr. Trump is dominating all world developments. Indeed, you can't go through a day without hearing major reports on what Trump is doing domestically or internationally. The reality with respect to the Russian-Ukraine war is that Mr. Putin is dominating events. He is being very considerate. He doesn't want to insult the Americans, least of all Mr. Trump, and he is giving them the appearance of controlling events when de facto the Russians are controlling events. A week ago, Americans were saying that the Russians must change their negotiating team. Mr. Medinsky is too aggressive and so forth, that the negotiation should be held in Geneva. Well, the many suggestions were coming from the States. The reality is that Mr. Putin and his team have determined where they will take place, which is in Istanbul, and what they will do. They will review memoranda, which will not be disclosed to the public or to the other side before the 2nd of June. So, and Mr. Medinsky remains in charge of the Russian negotiating team. So what I'm saying is that without insulting President Trump, Mr. Putin is de facto controlling events. Draw it out. The Russians, of course, they're drawing it out until and unless they receive what they want, which is a truce or a ceasefire that cannot be violated by the Ukrainians, in the sense that they will be rearming, repositioning their troops, and so forth, and so regaining some stability, which they have lost in the preceding weeks. The war on the front is dominated by the Russians. They are pushing the Ukrainians steadily back a few hundred meters a day, a few kilometers a day, all across the front. They are, in your news, you mentioned the attacks on Pokrovsk, which the Russians called Krasnoarmeysk. Yes, that is a key transport hub, a major point of defense of the Ukrainian forces and distribution logistics center, and it is partly taken over already by the Russians. It will soon be in Russian hands. After that, the next news that we'll have, that you will be placing before your viewers, will be the Russians' attack on Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which are the last remaining major towns in the Donetsk Oblast. That is before you reach the Dnieper River. We're coming to that. So we don't have to speak about a late summer offensive, a massive offensive, a Russian move in the fall. No. In the coming weeks, we will see gradually the Ukrainian forces, without the front collapsing, but they are being progressively pushed back towards the Dnieper River. That is how the war is evolving.
Yes, Gilbert, I will repose the same question just because I'd like a more direct response to whether Vladimir Putin actually wants peace in this war. You've just detailed there all of the gains that are being made. You've said that Russia are controlling these discussions, which is something that Western leaders have said. Russia is setting the agenda. Putin says he wants direct talks with Zelensky. Zelensky offers them. Putin says no. Does Putin want peace?
He wants peace, and he wants a peace treaty. Let there be no mistake about that. If the war ends with a Russian running to the Dnieper River and the Ukrainian forces collapsing, but without a peace treaty, the Russians will be very unhappy. Mr. Putin is a legally minded person. He is a lawyer by training. He wants a piece of paper signed by a legitimate representative of the Ukrainian nation. Why? He doesn't want to face the next 20 or 30 years of Russia being subjected to terrorist attacks by Ukrainians who are in a chaotic region that doesn't have a proper government. He wants Ukraine to be headed by a legitimate government, which concludes a valid peace treaty with Russia. And so it's taking some time. He set conditions which are harsh, but which Russia will not step back from, and which Russia will eventually obtain. Namely, that a truce, a ceasefire, is part of a global settlement that will be validated by European and U.S. powers, and will be a peace for a long term and not just for the next 6 months.
Yes, Gilbert Doctorow, thank you ever so much for joining us. We will, of course, continue to bring you all of the developments on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war ahead of potential direct talks in Istanbul on Monday. We move now to the Indo-Pacific region, and at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued a direct warning on China's military posturing in the region. Hegseth called out China, calling it a threat. He said Beijing's army is rehearsing for the real deal, pointing to China's military drills around Taiwan. Let's listen to the US Defense Secretary.
It has to be clear to all that Beijing is credibly preparing to potentially use military force to alter the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. We know, it's public, that Xi has ordered his military to be capable of invading Taiwan by 2027. The PLA is building the military needed to do it, training for it every day, and rehearsing for the real deal.
Well, Hegseth also stressed that the US will not leave its allies alone in the region and promised a stronger defence presence while urging partner nations to invest more in their own security. Reassuring US commitment, he said the future of America is intertwined with the region's security and prosperity. Let's listen in again to Pete Hegseth.
America is proud to be back in the Indo-Pacific, and we're here to stay. The United States is an Indo-Pacific nation. We have been since the earliest days of our republic. We will continue to be an Indo-Pacific nation with Indo-Pacific interests for generations to come. And under President Trump's leadership, the United States is committed to achieving peace through strength. That starts with deterring aggression around the world and here in the Indo-Pacific, here in our priority theater, here with you, our allies, and our partners.
Well, Hegseth emphasised the shift away from imposing ideology and instead building defence ties based on common sense and mutual interest. Hegseth warned that any Chinese attempt to forcefully take Taiwan would have devastating global consequences, reaffirming that the US does not seek war, but will not be pushed out of the region. Moving on now, US President Donald Trump announced that representatives from Pakistan will visit the United States next week to discuss trade deals, including tariffs. Pakistan faces a possible 29% tariff on exports to the US due to a $3 billion trade surplus. Trump also expressed his unwillingness to make deals with Pakistan or India if the two countries engage in war, following recent clashes between the nuclear-armed neighbours. India, which faces 26% tariffs on exports to the US, is also in trade talks with Washington, with an interim agreement expected by early July. Trump mentioned that India is close to finalising a deal and recently hosted Indian Trade Minister Piyush Goyal to advance the negotiations. Staying with trade, US Trade Representative Jameson Greer is scheduled to meet next week with his European Union counterparts during his visit to Europe. Greer emphasised that China remains the largest contributor to the US trade deficit, with the EU close behind. Ahead of meetings at the OECD, he will also engage with trade officials from Malaysia, Vietnam and the EU, while maintaining daily communications with India's trade minister amid ongoing negotiations. Greer expressed serious concern over China's non-compliance with trade agreements, stressing the need for prompt resolution. He noted some officials continue to prolong negotiations. President Trump also stated that China has violated its tariff agreements, signalling continued challenges in US-China trade relations. Also, Greer stated that the United States is prepared to deploy other measures should tariff rulings be unfavourable. In related developments, President Trump recently announced an increase in tariffs on imported steel and aluminium, raising rates from 25% to 50% to protect American industries and jobs. Meanwhile, trade talks with Japan are advancing, with both parties optimistic about reaching an agreement soon. Staying with North America, and the US Supreme Court has ruled in favour of the Trump administration's immigration policy, allowing the government to revoke temporary protections for hundreds of thousands of migrants. The decision affects an estimated 532,000 individuals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua and Venezuela who entered the United States under a 2-year humanitarian parole program established by former President Joe Biden. The ruling represents a significant legal victory for US President Donald Trump. It is the second time the Supreme Court has backed his immigration initiatives, which have faced numerous legal challenges. The parole program had allowed up to 30,000 migrants per month to enter the US temporarily from the 4 countries mentioned earlier, all of which have been criticised for human rights violations. Earlier this month, the court also cleared the way for the deportation of around 350,000 Venezuelans. The current case stems from a decision by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to end an 18-month extension of temporary protected status for the migrants. A 30-day notice had been issued for those impacted to depart the US unless they qualify for other legal protections. Staying once again in the United States, President Trump is praising Elon Musk as his time as a special government employee comes to an end. Standing alongside the billionaire entrepreneur, Trump hailed Musk's work in leading the White House's Department of Government Efficiency, calling it the most sweeping government reform in generations. Despite reaching his 130-day limit as a special employee, Trump says Musk isn't going far, calling Doge his baby and hinting that the tech mogul will continue to influence the initiative from the sidelines. Let's listen in to what the US president had to say about Elon Musk.
With Doge, many of the Doge people, Elon, are staying behind too, so they're not leaving. And Elon's really not leaving. He's going to be back and forth, I think. I have a feeling. It's his baby, and I think he's going to be doing a lot of things. But Elon's service to America has been...
You said just now that you look forward to being a friend and advisor to the president. So do you expect to continue advising the president and Doge informally, or are you going to sort of shift your focus entirely to your companies?
Well, I expect to continue to provide advice whenever the president would like advice.
I hope so.
I mean, I expect to remain a friend and an advisor, and certainly if there's anything the president wants me to do, I'm at the president's service.
Mr. Musk.
Musk had promised to slash $1 trillion in federal spending, even wielding a chainsaw on stage to symbolise cutting bureaucracy. But the actual savings reported stand at around $170 billion. Critics point to errors and a potential $135 billion in unintended costs. Well, staying with the businessman, as per a New York Times article, Elon Musk allegedly engaged in frequent drug use while serving as a close advisor to US President Donald Trump. The report claims that Musk regularly took ketamine to the extent that it caused bladder problems and travelled with an estimated 20 pills daily. According to anonymous sources cited by the Times, Musk also used ecstasy and psychedelic mushrooms during this period, including while donating $275 million to Trump's campaign and leading the Department of Government Efficiency. The Times report comes days after Musk announced his exit from government service. His departure reportedly follows months of controversial, including incidents of erratic behaviour, such as insulting cabinet members and making a Nazi-like salute at a political rally. US President Donald Trump has responded to questions about a reported breach of his chief of staff's phone shortly after returning from a rally in Pennsylvania. Trump commented on reports that his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, may have been targeted by an impersonation attempt. He acknowledged hearing about the incident and praised Wiles as an amazing woman and added that nobody can impersonate Susie. Meanwhile, US federal authorities are investigating into the matter. According to reports, senators, governors, top US business executives and other figures received messages and calls from a person who claimed to be Wiles. FBI Director Kash Patel has said in a statement that the Bureau is treating all threats targeting the President, his staff and national cybersecurity with the utmost seriousness. The comments come amid ongoing concerns about cybersecurity vulnerabilities in the US government. Earlier this month, the hacker breached a communications platform used by Trump's national security advisor Mike Waltz, gaining access to messages from numerous US officials. Staying with President Donald Trump, who has addressed the possibility of pardoning hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs amid the rapper's high-profile federal sex trafficking trial in New York. Trump said he would be willing to look at the facts of the case before making any decisions on a potential pardon. While no formal request has been made, the president acknowledged that people have come closer to asking him about granting clemency to Combs. Trump also remarked that despite their social connections in the 1990s, he has not spoken to Combs in years and said any decision will be based strictly on the merits of the case, not personal relationships. Combs, known also as Puffy or P. Diddy, faces charges including racketeering, sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. He's pleaded not guilty to all counts, but could face life in prison if convicted. Heading back over to Europe, thousands of people took to the streets of Serbia's capital Belgrade on Friday, demanding early elections. This follows 7 months of nationwide anti-corruption protests. The movement, driven by university students, began after a train station collapse in November killed 16 people. Protesters blame the tragedy on corrupt infrastructure deals linked to Chinese companies and are now calling for justice and a snap vote. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has faced mounting pressure. Critics accuse him of suppressing democratic freedoms. Here is what some of the demonstrators have said.
Pa, kao i današnji skup, ovo je poziv na izbore. Studenti su pre neko vreme tražili izbore, mi smo tu da podržimo tu poruku i tražimo izbore.
Zbog svega što se dešava zadnjih 30, da ne kažem zadnjih 15 godina, zbog javašluka i zbog saznanja da je Srbija nečija prćija i to više nije dozvoljeno uopšte. Ničija, ne njegova, ničija. Srbija je naša.
Moving on now, David Seymour, leader of the ACT New Zealand party, has been sworn in as New Zealand's new Deputy Prime Minister. Seymour succeeds Winston Peters in the role following a coalition agreement reached in 2023. The ACT party is the junior partner in the centre-right coalition government led by Prime Minister Christopher Luxon. Seymour will continue as Regulation Minister and Associate Minister of Health, Finance and Education. Known for his libertarian views, Seymour has championed issues such as euthanasia and abortion rights. This marks a significant step in New Zealand's political landscape. That is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news from across the world.